Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you very, very much. So we can reconvene our SCPC 30 meeting with the item agenda number 5, that is the revised policies and guideline on data sharing, confidentiality, and dissemination. So this will be presented by ASEAN Secretariat. ASEAN Secretariat, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this agenda, I will share the recent revision to the document of revised policies, guidelines, and on data sharing, confidentiality, and dissemination. Since there is only minor revision in this time, we do not prepare the slide. Instead, we will display the document directly. So in this round of change related to dissemination enhancement under SNA, as shown on the screen, the updates is located in section 1.7 under disclosure of SNA. The change concern GDP by production that has been enhanced to cover both annual and quarterly levels, while the expenditure is available at annual level for this phase. This revision was already shared during the 9 WGSNA meeting last week. Normally, once endorsed by the relevant working group, the draft document is circulated to WGDSA for reference. Since the meeting only took place last week, that circulation has not yet been done. However, during the WGDSA meeting in June this year, ASEAN-STAT had already informed WGDSA in advance about this update. Given that this is a minor change, we do not anticipate any particular concern from WGDSA member regarding the dissemination. ASEAN-STAT will circulate the revision document to WGDSA members next week. I think that's all update on the revision of the policies and guidelines on data sharing, confidentiality, and dissemination for SCPC members notation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Suika, on the brief presentation on policies and guidelines on data sharing, confidentiality, and dissemination. May I call upon any ASEAN member states would like to provide their views or feedbacks on this particular amendment? If there's none, maybe we can proceed to the next item of the agenda. That is item 6 on ASEAN ACSS Action Plan 2026-2030 and ACSS MNE Key Performance Indicator. So this will be presented by ASEAN-STAT. Pak Anang, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon again, all colleagues, members of SCPC. So in this session, I would like to present some updates on SSS Action Plan as well as the KPIs for our MNE. And we will need to seek your inputs and agreement also for several items. Next slide, please. So as the work we started since last year, and the draft itself mostly we did last year also. So this year mainly we try to see all the information from the updates on the international standard in statistics as well as some development in ASEAN. And also this year, all our working groups have used the draft SSS action plan for their reference in drafting the multi-year plan of each working group. Next slide, please. So just to refresh to all of us, the outline of SSS Action Plan 2026 to 2030 consists of introduction and then the mandate, and then achievements under SSS Strategic Plan 2016 to 2025, issues and challenges, vision and mission, key enabling mechanisms, strategic measures, and key recommendations, as well as detailed activities. And for strategic measures, this is also to refresh you. In our strategic plan for 2016 to 2025, we use the term of main component, but in the next action plan for 2026 to 2030, following the guideline from ASEAN Economic Community, then we use the term of strategic measures. Next slide, please. So our action plan for 2026 to 2030 has 4 strategic measures. The first one is strengthen institutional environment, foster partnership, and enhance the sustainability of SSS. Second strategic measure is improve the response to greater ASEAN data needs. Third strategic measure is to enhance dissemination, communication, visibility, and use of ASEAN statistics. And the last one is to bridge the gaps towards sustainable development of ASEAN statistics. And under each strategic measure, we have a list of activity and also supporting activities. Next slide, please. So after the presentation in SSS 14 last year, basically SSS committee agreed on the proposed strategic measures and list of activities, while acknowledging the potential need for further refinements to incorporate latest statistical issues and development as necessary before finalizing and endorsing during SSS 15 on next November. And as I mentioned earlier, this draft action plan is also used by all of SSS working groups as reference in developing their multi-year plan for 2026 to 2030. And based on the information that we receive from each working group, we could inform you that for working groups, namely working group on international investment statistics, working group on statistic of international trade in services, working group on SDG indicators, and working group on data sharing and dissemination of ASEAN statistics have finalized their multi-year plan. The other 2 working groups, working group on international merchandise trade statistic and working group on system of national account, they have drafted and discussed the multi-year plan, but currently still on the stage of refinement. So these 2 working groups will finalize their multi-year plan soon, I think. Next slide, please. And as we discussed in our first SCPC meeting in Kuala Lumpur, we presented one proposal from WGIIS. In their MYP, they include one supporting activities, which is to establish interagency working group at national level, applicable only to AMS with more than one institution serving as data source or compiler of FDI statistic, with clear allocation of work to avoid redundancy and synchronized data collection or compilation or data sharing or dissemination process. So since we think that these activities could be relevant also to other working group, then we brought this up to our last SCPC meeting. And during that meeting, SCPC suggested to discuss this with all other SSS working groups. And we discussed this in their meeting this year. And in general, all working groups, except WGSNA, they agreed to include this in their multi-year plan, but with some necessary adjustment in the sentences to incorporate current situation in member states. So in some working groups, they didn't mention interagency working group, but instead they mention certain mechanism for interagency cooperation. For example, it's like that, yeah, to have some adjustment. However, for WGSNA, the working group is on the view that actually such kind of mechanism is already exists, yeah, into some extent in its member state. Therefore, for WGSNA, this is not an issue, yeah, currently, yeah, because they already have a certain mechanism in the country. Therefore, if during the meeting SCPC suggested to seek possibility to include this supporting activity in the SCSS action plan also, but since we have working group that suggested not to include this in their multi-year plan, therefore, in this occasion, we propose to keep these activities under multi-year plan of the respective working groups, not necessarily in SSS action plan. So this is just a proposal for SCPC input and agreement later on after my presentation. Next slide, please. Another proposal for refinement, this is for SSS action plan, and this is from ASEAN Stats. During the discussion with working groups, and then during our internal discussion when we check the KPIs, we found something that we think that it is necessary for SCPC to discuss. The first one is on the supporting activity 1.4.1 under the current draft of SSS action plan. In this case is on their key output or key deliverables. In the current draft, for the supporting activity, we have two key deliverables. The first one is to develop concept note related to data governance and stewardship. And then second deliverables is implementation of the concept note itself, yeah. However, as you may know, that the development of the concept notes is being done this year and to be endorsed this year. Therefore, we propose to remove or to delete the first deliverable in our action plan, because the period of our action plan is from 2026, but the draft concept note we will endorse this year. So it will be no longer relevant, yeah, for 2026. This is the first proposal from us. And then the second proposal is related with supporting activity 1.5.1. The original sentence for the supporting activities is to develop system and processes for collecting, storing, and sharing knowledge and information. However, after second consideration, we think that not only in ASEAN state, but in member state also, we believe we already have our current system and processes for collecting, storing, and sharing knowledge and information. Yeah. So we think that develop would be less relevant because if we use develop intentionally, I think we mean to develop or to build from zero or from beginning. Therefore, in this case, we would like to propose to change the word develop to enhance. Yeah. And consequently, for the key output and deliverable, we propose to add the word enhance as well. Yeah. So system and processes for collecting, storing, and sharing knowledge and information is developed and enhanced as necessary. So these two are our proposal for SCPC to consider for refinement of our current draft of SSS action plan. Next slide, please. And then the next one is on SSS MNE KPIs, also for 2026, for 2026 to 2030. We had presented this also to SSS committee in SSS 14 last year after SCPC work on drafting. And during the meeting, SSS committee agreed on the proposed KPIs designed for MNE framework of the SSS. And these KPIs serve as important tools for measuring progress and promoting continuous improvement in the implementation of SSS initiatives. And we agreed also that this list of KPIs to be endorsed together with SSS action plan in SSS 15 next November. And then the meeting also agreed to implement the monitoring of current KPIs together with pilot and trial assessment on the new list of SSS KPIs for 2026 to 2030 in 2025. The purpose is to obtain input and a set of baseline before full implementation in 2026. So actually, when we circulate to member states, the monitoring of KPI for our current MNE KPI, for our current strategic plan, actually, the original plan is for ASEAN state to circulate the new list of KPI also for 2026 to 2030. However, again, after having internal review and discussion, we found a few things that we need SCPC inputs and suggestion on the list of KPI for 2026 to 2030. Next slide, please. Maybe I will not read all the list of KPIs, but I would go to the indicators where we need your inputs and suggestion. Next slide, please. Yes, so under strategic measure 2, improve the response to greater ASEAN data needs. For activity 2.1, strengthen standard methodology and classification for the production of ASEAN statistics. The KPIs is about rate of data submission by member states to ASEAN state. And as we discussed last year, we would like to enhance if for the current KPI, we use only the rate or the proportion of indicators submitted, but last year we agreed to enhance the indicator to be able to measure the quality of the indicators itself, yeah, not only the data submission. So originally the proposed indicators we have two here. One is proportion of indicators submitted to ASEAN-STAT in compliance with relevant international standard. So this is an extension from the sentence we use currently. Current KPI, we don't have the word in compliance with relevant international standard. And the second indicator is proportion of indicators submitted to ASEAN-STAT with metadata. So we would like to raise an issue to SCPC members. For number one, for example, if we use these indicators when we discuss internally in ASEAN-STAT just for trial, and then we made an issue when the country still do not follow international standards. Let's say we take example for FDI statistic, for example. In FDI statistics, if we follow the balance of payment manuals, the 6th edition and later on the 7th edition of the manual, the company that is included in FDI statistic, there is one requirement in the concept that if the company at least have 10% of ownership, yeah. But we know also based on our knowledge and our engagement in the working group, we still have country that do not comply completely with this concept, yeah. But this concept is very, what I mean is the main concept of FDI or balance of payment statistics, meaning that if this concept is not complied yet, so almost all indicators submitted to us, we can say that this is not comply with the international standard. So the proportion will be very, very low, yeah, even nearly to zero for certain statistical area. And the next one, next issues is on indicator number 2 under this activity, proportion of indicators submitted to ASEAN-STAT with metadata. In the current practice, we have some differences, yeah. We have some differences on how the working group capture the metadata, yeah, for each statistical area. For example, we have some statistical area where the metadata is submitted for each indicator, yeah. For example, on SDG, we have metadata representing every single indicator in the SDG. However, for some other working groups, for example, working group on international investment statistic, working group on SITS and IMTS also, the metadata submitted is in the form of one file, one paper, not representing each indicator. So there is some point also to discuss about this, how we measure the proportion, yeah, with this kind of differences that we have in statistical area that we cover for data submission and data dissemination. So we need your inputs and suggestion also on this matter. And next slide, please. So those are the issues only in the strategic measure number 2. Next slide, Afri. Also next slide. And then another thing, until current draft, what we have is the list of KPIs. And in the last SCPC meeting, if you remember when ASEAN-STAT presented the key outcome indicators of the AEC strategic plan, at that time we mentioned that SSS is not included in the AEC key outcome indicators. However, after the following discussion in the ASEAN Post 2025 working group, finally it was decided that all sectoral bodies should have outcome indicators as well, yeah. Although it is not included in the AEC key outcome indicators, but all sectoral bodies is requested to have key outcome indicators for each strategic measure. So we never discussed about this before. So in this occasion, ASEAN-STAT would like to propose this. This is just to start our discussion. ASEAN-STAT would like to show, this is from our idea, on the possible outcome indicator for each strategic measure that we have. Yeah. Actually, we could have only one outcome indicator for each strategic measure. But again, this is just to start the discussion. ASEAN-STAT have ideas, two ideas for each strategic measure. For example, for strategic measure 1, strengthen institutional environment, foster partnership, enhance the sustainability of SCSS. Our idea is to have outcome indicators, for example, proportion of SSS committee decisions formally endorsed and implemented by all ASEAN member states. Yeah. This is to show commitment or stronger partnership among us and to show commitment to our initiative. And then our second idea is number of regional or international cooperation directly contributing to new enhanced indicators. So as we highlight in the first SCPC meeting, which we will discuss also in the next session, that from the AEC key outcome indicators, there are a lot of new needs for statistical indicators. And in this case, our proposal is for the number of international cooperation which directly contributing to us for the enhancement of the provision of new indicator. And then for strategic measure number 2, improve the response to greater ASEAN data needs. Our proposal for the outcome indicators are average time lag between data reference period and regional release for key indicators of ASEAN statistics. So not for all indicators, but key indicators that we can decide also together for the indicators. And then the proportion of newly emerging needs that produce and disseminated within certain period of time. Yeah. The period of time also we can discuss and decide together whether it is 1 year, 2 years, or even more. Yeah. And then next slide, please. For strategic measure number 3, enhance dissemination, communication, and visibility and use of ASEAN statistics. The proposed indicators are user engagement index of ASEAN-STAT data portal. Such kind of index, for example, by identifying the users, number of users to ASEAN-STAT data portal that visited our website multiple times. Yeah. This is just one example to see the enhancement of our dissemination and visibility. And then the second proposal is the frequency of ASEAN statistics reference or referred in regional media, research publication, and international reports. We still have big question mark on how to calculate this, but again, this is idea. Maybe we can later on we can limit to let's say famous media only or some other option. Yeah. And then for strategic measure number 4, bridge the gap towards sustainable development of ASEAN statistics. The first proposed indicator is number of e-learning materials uploaded in ASEAN Statistic Virtual Academy. And the second one is degree of comparability across ASEAN member state for key indicators of ASEAN statistics. For this second one, maybe we can see the proportion of indicators or countries who have completely comply with international standard of certain indicators. We know that this seems difficult, but to be honest, we also confused when we discuss about this. But again, this is to start our discussion. So that's all our updates and presentation for this session, Mr. Chair and colleagues. We really need your inputs and agreement. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Anand, for the presentation on our action plan in as well as the ACSS MNE KPI for our next 5 years plan. So maybe we can start off with the proposed refinement that is on page. Proposed refinement 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Page 6 of your presentation, right? Because this matter we need to have an agreement from the SCPC members. Okay, so item number 1, that is the draft WGIIS MYP 2026-2030. Okay, so maybe can we have some views from our member states first? Can I call upon from Brunei?
Okay. For Brunei, we have no objection on the proposal to keep the supporting activity in multi-year work plan of working groups. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Brunei. Can we have Cambodia's view on this particular matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cambodia would like to our appreciate that proposal made or key strategic measure. I would like to just share the view from our relevant to the national practices. We would like to suggest that as the proposed on the include or the strengthen interagency cooperation and coordination, I agree with this activity. It should be remain as part of the under the action plan or activity of the relevant working group rather than just extend to put in the existing ACSS strategic plan. Regarding the and the second point regarding this proposed for refinement and also share the view regarding the expect outcome. for those related key strategic plan, for example, about the strengthened institutional environment for foster partnership and enhancement the sustainability of ACSS, and they propose related the expected outcome. I would suggest that it's agree to identify concept around of this proposed outcome, and then we can identify, if possible, just one expected outcome in general rather than just very specific. Because I think, for example, under this strategic number one, my personal view, I was thinking that it should be the proportion of ACSS committee decision making along the implementation. It should be just combined with the integrated of the regional and also AMS international cooperation directly to contributing on those activities. Just one part maybe would be enough. That just we observe that, and similarly the other strategic measure, it should be considered similar as what I thought that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Kemodia. Kemodia have gone very far into the slides. Thank you, Mr. Lechan. Okay, so can I have views from Indonesia?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the establishment of agency working group at national level, I think we concur with the general decision of the working group to keep this activity under the related working group rather than the SSS action plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Indonesia. Can I have Laos views on slide number 6? Okay, so can I have Malaysia's view? Malaysia?
Hello.
Hold on. Is it Laos?
Yes, from Laos.
Okay, so please,
Thank you.
can we have your views on this?
Thank you for the presentations. And from Laos, we have no objections now, from now on. And if we have anything else, then we will let you know. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Malaysia, please continue. Thank you very much, Malaysia. Okay, so can I have Myanmar to put up your views? Thank you.
Thank you for inviting in the case of Myanmar, just the investment data collecting just only one by DIGA, Directorate of Investment and Company Registration. This is the coverage of all investment indicator. Thank you.
Thank you, Myanmar, for the sharing. So can I proceed with PSA, the Philippines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like the other AMS, the Philippines also supports the proposed refinement. However, I'd just like to seek a clarification. It based on the slide, it states that all working groups except for the WGSNA agreed to include this in their multi-year plan. I'm just curious about the reason. Is it because all the AMS already have an existing interagency working group working on at the national level with regards to the national accounts? So, and this is more of a question, Mr. Chair. Probably, if I may request the Secretariat to shed some light on this. Thank you.
Thank you, the Philippines. Can I have feedback from ASEAN Secretariat?
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question from Philippines regarding the exception on these activities on WGSNA. During the discussion, we get confirmation from all members that the interagency working group already established in certain mechanism in the countries, and some member state mentioned that the interagency working group or cooperations become mandatory, so no need the collaboration among interagency. So that's the reason why the WGSNA not to accommodate these additional activities. Thank you.
Thank you, ASEAN Secretariat. So if there's any further clarification from PSA?
No further clarification, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the Secretariat for the clarification.
Thank you so much. So can I have views and comments from Singapore?
Thank you, Chairman. Singapore is agreeable to having this activity being reflected under the multi-year work plan of the WG and not necessarily in the ATSS action plan. We can also give some flexibility to the WGs in the manner in which they may want to craft this activity, because as the ASEAN Secretariat has highlighted, in some of the AMSs, we already have a working mechanism. It may not be a formal working group, but there is already an established collaborative mechanism in place. So it may not be necessary for us to establish yet another working group, interagency working group. So we can allow WG some flexibility in the wording of this activity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singapore, for the comments, and then as well as your kind suggestions. Okay, so can I proceed with Thailand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thailand concurs and has no objection. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I have Vietnam's view on this matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From Vietnam, we agree with the idea that the interagency working group at national levels should be in the multi-year plan of working group, not in the ACSS action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vietnam. So thank you very much all ASEAN member states for your kind views and your confirmation on this particular matter. So I think with regard to the inputs from SCPC, we can say that the meeting agreed that this particular activity should be only available or to be stated in each working groups. However, there should be flexibility, as mentioned by Singapore, for them to either to put or not to put as part of their activities, and not to be mentioned or even measured in SCSS action plan. Can I say that, ASEAN Secretariat?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and our colleagues.
So can we go to slide number 7 on the proposed refinement on item 2 and item 3? That is the key deliverables for supporting activity 141, as well as the supporting activity for 151. So can I have views from Vietnam first?
From Vietnam side, we have no further comments and revision about the proposed refinement about the activity 1.41 and 1.51. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vietnam. Can I have views from Thailand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thailand also have no comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thailand. Can I have views from Singapore?
Chairman, for item 2, I think it might be a bit subject to misinterpretation if we were to say implementation of the concept note. Would we like to add implementation of key recommendations reflected in the concept note? It's not so much as implementing a concept note, but the outcomes of the recommendation suggestions coming in the concept note. So that's for item 2. For item 3, no issues with the changes suggested. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singapore, for your inputs as well as your suggestion on the to add on recommendation in the text of the concept note and on data governance and stewardship. Okay, so can I have the views from the Philippines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Philippines is amenable to the proposed refinements, particularly for supporting activity 1.4.1 and 1.5.1. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, Philippines. Thank you. So can I have the views and comment from Myanmar?
Thank you. We have no objection by Myanmar.
Thank you very much. For Malaysia? From Malaysia?
From Malaysia, we agree with the proposed refinements. No any further comments.
Thank you, Malaysia. So can I have Lao online?
Thank you, Chair. So we have no objections from now. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So can I have Indonesia's view and comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We concur with the proposals on supporting activity 1.4.1 and 1.5.1, and we have no further comments on that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so very much. Can I have Cambodia?
Thank you, Chair. Cambodia also observed that and found a similar idea from the other respected Asian member states. We confirm no and further comment. Thank you.
Appreciate it, Cambodia. Thank you. Can I have Brunei?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Brunei Darussalam, we agree with the proposed changes on the supporting activity 1.4.1 and 1.5.1. Thank you.
Thank you, Brunei. So on this proposed refinement on item 2 and item 3, the secretariat can further refine with the suggestion from Singapore on the implementation of recommendation of the concept note, and the others are all in agreement to the proposed refinement. Can I say that, ASEAN Secretariat?
Yes, well noted, Mr. Chair. We will revise based on the input and the revision. We will circulate the revision of the draft of action plan. We will circulate after the meeting also. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so can we proceed to ACSS MNE KPI 2026-2030, slide number 8. Oh, sorry, is it 8 or 8, 9, 10? This is slide number 10, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So can we have some views from our ASEAN member states? Can we start with Vietnam again?
Chưa rõ lắm.
Sorry, we are just missing some information about this KPI for strategic method tools. Regarding the proposed KPI, as you mentioned, from the NSO of Vietnam, we think that some indicators, the indicators produced by the AMS sometimes may be different from the relevant international standards. So the ASEAN staff should classify or list which indicator that AMS have the common, the general international standard, so that we can compare. And this is one of the KPI to compare and to evaluate the progress of AMS. That is our idea.
Thank you very much, Vietnam, for very good suggestion whereby
Mr. Chair, I saw Singapore raise hand.
So can I have so is there any? Okay, yeah, Singapore, please.
Thank you, Chairman and ASEAN Secretariat. I just thought that maybe before we start discussing on the MNE KPI and the outcome indicators, we may want to have some agreement on whether we want to have a separate set of outcome indicators or do we want the outcome indicators to be extracted from the MNE KPIs? My thinking is that we don't want to have too many indicators to monitor. So if it is possible, we may want to review some of the MNE KPIs to see whether they should be more of an outcome indicator. So basically, the outcome indicators that Pak Anang has suggested in the latter part of the deck should be a subset of the MNE KPIs rather than a separate set of indicators, because I think that will be a little bit too onerous for us to monitor so many indicators in addition to having to monitor our annual work plan as well as the multi-year plan. So maybe could we have a discussion on whether to have an integrated set so that the key outcome indicators is basically a subset of the MNE KPIs? Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Singapore, for the suggestion. And then can I have feedback from Pak Anang on these views from Singapore?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Priya. So your suggestion just now is for the outcome indicators, right? Not for this slide.
Pak Anang is actually basically to see whether we can integrate the outcome indicator into the MNE KPI so that we just have to monitor one set of indicators and extract from that one set of indicators, outcome indicators to be submitted to the SIOM track or the AEC track to monitor. So because right now I noticed that the outcome indicators are distinct from the MNE KPIs, except for maybe one indicator which is overlapping. So you end up monitoring the 20 MNE KPIs as well as the 6 outcome indicators. So my suggestion is to have only 20, and if we need to amend some of the 20 to incorporate the 6, then we will do that instead, rather than monitor 26. So ultimately, we just have less than 20 indicators to monitor.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure. Carry on.
So it means the outcome indicators is a subset of the KPIs. In other words, if people ask, it means the outcome indicators and the performance indicators, they're at the same level. Because
Yeah.
KPIs is at activity level, right?
So the KPIs can be both at the activity as well as the outcome level, right? Like for example, your first outcome indicator is also a KPI, MNE KPI. So what I'm suggesting is that if we feel that some of the MNE KPIs, instead of monitoring currently at the activity level, we want to bring it up to an outcome level, I suggest that we do that instead of having to monitor 2 sets of indicators. So the outcome indicators, we can just extract from our monitoring of KPIs and share it with the AEC track.
Okay, understood. Yeah. So we understand, Mr. Chair, but of course the decision will go back to member states.
Thank you, Pak Anang. Maybe I go everyone first. Thailand just now, we stop at Thailand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I agree with Priya that outcome indicator has been extracted from the KPI. Yes, and also I think we not need to have so many indicators. More than 20. It should be less than 20, as Priya mentioned. Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Thailand. So Singapore, anything to add? Okay, thank you. So can I continue with the Philippines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We also support the proposal of Singapore if it would be possible to integrate the outcome indicators with the rest so that we're only talking about one set. It might be it would probably be more efficient if we do it that way, if it's possible. And then point of clarification for the proposed KPI for 2.1, we took note that there are two proposed KPIs, namely the proportion of indicators submitted in compliance with relevant international standards, and the other one submitted to ASEAN stats with metadata. Is our understanding correct that we need, my question is that do we need both indicators, or is it possible to just choose one? Because we took note that for the other activities, normally you only have one indicator to measure. So we'd like to request clarification from the Secretariat, please. Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you very much, the Philippines. So can I seek clarification from ASEAN Stats?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Philippine, for the question. Based on our discussion last time, we need both because each of them measure different thing. The first one is measure the quality of our data, into what extent we comply with international standard. And in the second one is to measure another dimension of quality, which is the clarity of the data, which is measured by the completeness of metadata. So based on our discussion, we need this both in our KPIs. What we raise here is after we have internal discussion and let's try to feel the measurement. We find the issues that I mentioned earlier. For example, number 8, proportion of indicator in compliance with relevant international standard. There is a big possibility that in certain key statistical area, in certain member states, the proportion will be very low. And then secondly, on metadata, we raise here because we have differences in the current practice. In some working groups, in some statistical area, the metadata is for each indicator. But in some working group, the metadata is submitted in general for the statistical area. So that's why we need your inputs on this. In case we still keep here, and no revision or no additional on the sentence, then we will measure using this sentence, and then we can report to you whatever the result. Yeah. But maybe we will need further thinking for number 9. Yeah, how we can calculate the proportion. Yeah, what we have in mind is that, let's say for FDI, for example, the working group on international investment statistics submitted the metadata is in one file, one paper to cover all. Yeah. So if, for example, if one country submit the metadata, then we can say 100% of the indicators already submitted the metadata. For example, it's like that. Yeah. But for SDG, we will consider each indicator one by one. So it is okay if it is like this, but the consequences is what I mentioned just now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ASEAN Secretariat. So can we continue on to discuss this particular slide? Can I have the views from Myanmar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To know clear about indicator, need to show or need to discuss with the metadata. But for KPI is metadata is okay. Now we reconsideration for M&E need or not. But I don't know about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Myanmar, for sharing your views. So can I have Malaysia? Malaysia? Okay, so thank you very much, Malaysia, for supporting. So can I have views from Laos?
Lapidia, about that the second is the standard and methodology and classification for the production of ASEAN statistics. So we try to catch up that the international standard, but nowadays it's still not not much on this, but we try our best on this. We have the division who will take care about that the standard. We focus on the classification and also the methodology. So, thank you.
Thank you, Lau, for sharing. So can we go to Indonesia? Can we say? Thank you.
2,5 hingga 3 suku tu.
Yes,
Lebih dah
thank you, Mr.
3
Chair.
suku.
First of all, I would like to agree
3
on
suku.
the proposal from
345 dah.
Singapore to extract the outcome
Ini
from the KPI.
345
And the second
suku
one,
tu.
we also, in principle, we support the proposed KPI number 8 to submit to ASEAN Stats the indicators in compliance with relevant international standards. However, we need to, to be clearly defining or specify which international standards are used. For example, the SNA 2008 or PMP Module 6 and Module 7. And then we also need to consider other member states, their readiness to on how to submit this proposed KPI, because I think to what extent one country comply with international standards, we really need to take a look into that. And then regarding the proposed KPI number 9, I think I need to consult it first with the relevant working group. I think that's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia, for your kind view, and I think a very great input there, whereby, as mentioned by Vietnam as well, where we should have our guiding content that we can measure on this item KPI 8 and 9. So can I have Cambodia's view on this matter? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cambodia would like to ask for the clarification from the Asian Stat regarding the proposed KPI under especially activity 2.1. We observe that after we submitted this the performance activity, we think that it might be very different from the working group among the other for the submission, and we want to know during the submission whether this activity and the assignment is responsible by the SCPC to be submitted for the representative the whole working group, or would be a separated working group. I understand This proposed KPI will be fall under each working group to be submitted. So that's our view, but in general, we agree with this proposal. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so very much, Cambodia. Last but not least, can we have views and comments from Brunei Darussalam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, for Brunei, we welcome to the proposed KPIs, but actually we also agree I support the comment from Indonesia that we need to identify which international standards and which indicators that are included in this for this KPI, and then for that one for KPI 8, and then for the KPI 9, I think this KPI may not apply to certain working groups. And for the I would like to comment on the Singapore's suggestion. Actually, we support the suggestion on to integrate streamline into more integrated KPI rather than having too much separate indicators. So we can focus more attention to our KPIs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brunei Darussalam. So with that note, we can conclude that AMS are in the position of we agree to the list of KPI. However, there should be guidance in terms of the indicators as well as the related or relevant manuals or international standard accompanied, so that it can be a guideline or a guiding document for the AMS to proceed. And the next suggestion is whether the extra work of identifying KPIs can be made simpler, and the AMS will not be the focus of achieving the targeted KPI can be much more focused. Can I conclude in that order, Ms. ASEAN Stats?
Mr. Chair, I see Singapore ASEAN.
Yeah. Yes, Priya.
Thank you, Chair and ASEAN Stat. Just hearing the views from around the table from the various EMSs, I was just thinking whether we should be making some changes to the KPI 8 and 9. Hearing Philippines' view that we don't need to have 2 KPIs for this, as well as hearing views from Indonesia and Brunei on issues that we may encounter in terms of identifying which standards or methodology or concept and classification that we should be looking at. I'm just wondering whether we can have like a one consolidated KPI, something that goes that measures both quality as well as adherence to international comparability. So it could be something like a proportion of indicators submitted to ASEAN Stat that are regionally comparable. Because if it is regionally comparable, that means they do adhere to certain standards. And without, if they, again, to reiterate regional comparison, they should be of a certain quality as well. So it could be like a combined indicator, which might be more measurable than the current 2 indicators that have been proposed. So I just let ASEAN Stat side of it.
Thank you very much, Priya, for your kind views and suggestions. Okay, so is there any other views or comments around the table virtually? If no, can I proceed to the slide number 13 and 14 on the
Mr. Chair,
proposal?
sorry.
Yes.
Yes, just to respond suggestion from Singapore. Yeah, first, actually for number 9, for metadata, actually it shouldn't be that big problem, yeah. Just we need to have common understanding on the differences among working group. And then for number 8, and in relation with suggestion from Singapore, using the word regionally comparable. Yes, it seems simpler, yeah. But my question is, actually our question here is, when we say comparable, maybe we go back again with the with the compliance of international standard, yeah. That is one issue, yeah. And with regard to that and related with the activity, strengthen standard, methodology, and classification, all those are mentioned in each standard, yeah. In SNA 2008 or 2025 SNA, it consists of standard, classification, methodology also, and then in BPM also. So if we follow your suggestion, Priya, for example, I think to some extent we need to go back to those standard as well, yeah. Then the same, maybe we will face a similar issue. This is my understanding, but I don't know if you have if you actually have different point of view.
Yeah, so Pak Anang, if I may add, Chairman, if you may give the floor. Basically, it sort of now pushes the burden from AMSs to ASEAN Stats. So I'm so sorry about this, but it's ASEAN Stats will be in a better position now to gauge whether the data that is being submitted to ASEAN Secretariat is actually regionally comparable. Whereas it would be very difficult for our own AMSs who are sometimes adopting international standards to our national needs as well. So when we are doing certain classifications, for example, Singapore has our own industrial classification, occupational classification, which are very much aligned to international standards, but they're also adopted to our local needs, right? So when we do compile data, it is based on our national standards, which are aligned to international standards. So I'm just thinking that maybe ASEAN Stat might be in a better position to identify the indicators which are regionally comparable. Rather than AMSs having to think through, which of these standards am I submitting, or which of these indicators am I submitting to ASEAN Stats that are aligned to international standards, which might be there could be some confusion because we might be looking at our own national standards which are adopted using international standards.
Mr. Chair, may I?
Sure, please.
Yes, thank you, Priya. Yes, it might be possible, but for your information, yeah, our current practice so far, yeah, related with the comparability, we have certain clear boundaries. For example, if the indicator is proxy indicators, definitely we will not use to calculate aggregate ASEAN, yeah, because it is obviously not comparable. However, for some other cases, for example, for certain indicators, although it is mutual understanding between us, ASEAN Stat and member state, that these indicators is not fully comply with international standard, but we still include in the regional tabulation, yeah, and regional aggregation. So maybe the next question is we want to use which one, yeah? That the strict one or a more compromised one? For example, if let's say we can consider as comparable if we include in the regional aggregation. We can say that, although we know that in some extent they are not really comparable, yeah. This is for the ease of the computation, yeah. But if you want to consider the real meaning of comparable, then it's different story. That's why we need your suggestion.
Chair, if I may add, I think I kind of agree with what Pak Anang is saying. Maybe at this point of time, it might be difficult for us to be true to complete comparability. So if we can take it as how Pak Anang has sort of defined it, where we are able to construct a regional indicator which are loosely comparable, we can include it as part of the proportion of the indicators that are regionally comparable. So we can have a slightly looser definition for regional comparability.
Thank you very much, Singapore, on your comments and views. With regard to the comparability of our regional statistics, I think one of our document that we can refer to is the ASICT, because there we have our we have a lot of our indicators that have been collected over the years, where we can see from the perspective of economy, we have our manufacturing statistics, population or demographic, we have our labor force, we have our CPI. So I think those are the statistics that is collected on a regular manner. So I think on that note, the ASEAN Secretariat can refer back to the content of ASICT. If you require the National Statistics Office to tag along what are the manual or what are the international guideline that they are referring to for that particular product or official statistics, they can add on. I think those are part of the list that we can refer to. Thank you very much, ASEAN Stat.
Mr. Chair,
Yes. So can we proceed with the proposed key outcome indicator for each strategic measure?
Regionally comparable.
Come again, because I lost you just now.
Yes, if we are in the same view or we agree on this, it means we need to revise number 8, indicator number 8, to follow Singapore suggestion. Proportion of
Apologize, we lost you.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Chair, sorry, I think the problem is on our side, the connection. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can do.
Okay. It means we need to revise the indicator number 8 to follow Singapore suggestion. Proportion of indicators submitted to ASEAN Stats, which is regionally comparable.
Can the
So-
chair say yes, I agree? We lost you again.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Chair. We are working on it. So can you hear me now, Mr. Chair?
Can.
Maybe the next one is still related to Singapore suggestion on to have outcome indicators as the subset of the KPI. So what would be the follow-up action for that?
So can we go to the slide, the proposed outcome indicator for each strategic measures? Slide number 13 and 14, right? Okay, so the first one is strengthen institutional environment, foster partnership, and enhance the sustainability of ASEAN of ACSS. And then these are the proposed strategic measures. Number one, proportion of ACSS committee decision formally endorsed and implemented. Number two is the number of regional or international cooperation directly contributing to new or enhanced indicators. And then the proposed key outcome is number two is improve the response of greater ASEAN data needs, and the strategic measures average time lag between data reference period and regional releases. And then the next strategic measure is proportion of newly emerging needs that produced and disseminated within certain period of time. Okay, so can we have a discussion on this from our member states? Can I call upon Brunei to seek your views and your comments?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, could you repeat that one more time?
On the slide, there is the proposed key outcome indicators for each strategic measures. So, what is Brunei's view on this matter?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, actually, we do agree with all the proposal here. No objections from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So can I go to Cambodia? Cambodia? Or can we seek Indonesia first? Then we can come back to Cambodia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the outcome indicators 1 and 2 only, or 3 and 4 also?
1 and 2 first.
Okay, for 1 and 2, we have no further comments on that. We can agree on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have Lau views or comments on this first two proposed key outcome?
For Lao PDR, so we submitted that mostly on the periods, but we still have some lags. It's about 15 days after the periods. Is it?
Okay, thank you, Lau, for sharing. Can we have Malaysia view?
มันพูดว่าบนได้อยู่ตัวนี้นะใช่คณะเป็น working group แต่มันโอเคไอ้เนาะอันนี้มันเป็นอันรวมไอ้แต่ว่าอันนู้นมันก็ได้อันนั้นลงมาเฉพาะโอเค
รวมกันเขาก็เขียนมาไปสิไปเขาตอบเขาก็กันให้มันได้เลย
Lau, do you have any further comments?
Sorry, no comment on this.
No problem, no problem. Okay, so can I have Malaysia's views?
Okay,
Thank you, Malaysia, for the support. Do we have Myanmar views on this slide? Thank you.
Yes, no objection from Myanmar for this slide.
Thank you. Can I have the Philippines?
In general, we are amenable to the indicators, although we just like to clarify the second indicator under the first strategic measure. When we say number of regional or international cooperation, are we referring to technical assistance, probably from a partner, a development partner, or basically we would just like to clarify what is meant by the term regional or international cooperation, Mr. Chair.
I see.
Thank you very much, the Philippines. So can I have feedback from ASEAN Secretariat on the number of regional or international cooperation, if it is meant for technical assistance or other engagement? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and Philippine for the question. Yes, what we have in mind is that capacity building that is directly related with new indicators. Yeah, that is what we have in mind. And Mr. Chair, if I may to have additional comment.
Please proceed.
Maybe we need to seek member state view also on Singapore idea, yeah. Whether we just need to extract from the list of KPIs to select some or a few of them to be KOI. And in that case, if member state agree on that approach, then Asansat would like to seek SCPC agreement to provide us some more time to review and to reconsider again and to propose to you which indicators to be proposed as key outcome indicators for each strategic measure.
Thank you very much, Asansat. So maybe we do not need to go to all AMS. So can I suggest, is there any objection to the proposal by Singapore on combining or having key outcome indicators derived from our activities? Yes, Singapore.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, if ASEAN needs to take the liberty to make some changes to the existing MNE KPIs, I suggest that, Pak Anang, please do so as well. Because if you feel that some of the KPIs that we currently have are too input based, although they are measuring the activity, but you feel that they are too input based and they need to be changed to something a little bit more output or outcome oriented, please also propose the changes to the M&E KPIs. So ideally what we want to have is maybe a set of 15 M&E KPIs. And from that 15 M&E KPIs, we can pick 4 to 5 as key outcome indicators, so that we don't have to really monitor too many sets of indicators, along with our various other activities as well, which is quite a lot of work for ASEAN Stats already. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, Singapore. Thank you. So, is there any objection from ASEAN member states? If there's no objection, then ASEAN Secretariat can pick up and we can proceed with the proposed arrangement as mentioned by Singapore. Can I say that, ASEAN Secretariat?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you very much. So we will review and prepare, and then we will circulate. But in this case, we need good cooperation also from all member states, because we need to be fast. We need to to settle this before SSS committee on the first week of November. It means we will have less than 2 months. So we will try to review and to propose some idea to SCPC. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, ASEAN Secretariat. So can we proceed with agenda number 7? That is the key outcome indicator, COI, of the ASEAN AEC strategic plan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the next session is particularly on the updates on the development of AEC strategic plan, particularly on the latest or final list of AEC key outcome indicators. Next slide, please. Yes, to refresh to all of us that ASEAN leaders officially adopted and launched the Compendium of ASEAN 2045, Our Shared Future. This is a successor document of the ASEAN 2025 Forging Ahead Together at the 46th of ASEAN Summit. And then this comprises the ASEAN Community Vision 2045 and its 4 strategic plan for each pillar, collectively charting a common course for a resilient, dynamic, and people-centered ASEAN. And following that, the ASEAN Economic Community Strategic Plan 2026 to 2030 was developed, which we use also as reference when we develop SSS Action Plan. And the development of AEC strategic plan was done through a series of consultation and deliberation with all AEC sectoral bodies, incorporating 6 strategic goals, 44 objectives, and 192 strategic measures from sectoral bodies. This is including 4 strategic measures of SSS. And then after that, the AEC also developed a list of key outcomes indicators for this strategic plan. And last week, on 11 to 12 September, during the 16th meeting of the Working Group on AEC 2045, the list of key outcome indicators was finalized. And the finalists consists of 94 indicators. Some of them are statistical indicators and some of them are non-statistical indicators. For your information, actually during the development of strategic plan and also the development of the list of key outcome indicators, apart from the discussion through the working group of AEC 2045, ASEAN Stats provided inputs and suggestion also to sectoral bodies and also to relevant division at the ASEAN Secretariat. Particularly the inputs that we provided to them is on the availability of the data, potential availability of the data, and then the availability of the data in external sources. What I mean is outside national sources, for example, from international organization, etc. And then the current works, the challenges and limitation faced by SCSS in enhancing official statistics in ASEAN. So we provided those kind of inputs. And for your information, previously we have, I think, more than 150 indicators in the list of KOIs. And some of our inputs were considered, so that some indicators were dropped from the list because of the unavailability of the data, because of unavailability of international standard, for example. However, some statistical indicators that currently still beyond SCSS reach finally included on the list, because they are considered as very important indicators. And then in the current list, actually the sectoral bodies, the relevant division in ASEAN Secretariat also in the view that currently SCSS cannot provide all those indicators. That's why we consider various sources of those indicators. So in the current list, some possible sources are from ASEAN Stat database, which is representing SCSS, and sectoral bodies itself who collect the data. And we utilize sources from international organization, national sources outside statistic office, for example, and some other sources. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the AEC strategic plan consists of 6 strategic goals, and under strategic goals, they have objectives, and under each objective, they have outcome indicators. What I present here is only the highlights of the indicators. The full list of indicators we provided also in the Dropbox, so you can see the full list. What I want to do here is to highlight for each strategic goal. For example, strategic goal number 1, an action-oriented community. We have statistical indicators for the outcome indicators, including trade in goods in certain total and in certain commodity, trade in services, FDI, and FDI in services, which is still challenges for our member state. Portfolio investment, this is also a big challenge, and number of registered professionals in member states. And for strategic goal number 2, a sustainable community, we have indicators on GHG emissions, for example, but this is breakdown. For example, GHG emission by transport, GHG emission by agriculture, things like that. And then values and trade-off materials, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, value of sustainable bonds, and then intensity and consumption of energy. And then strategy goal number 3, an enterprising, bold, and innovative community. The statistical indicators under this strategic goal are digital economy, and then indicators related to information and technology like ICT contribution, and then internet penetration. This is number of internet user or internet subscriber. R&D expenditure, contribution or proportion to GDP, the size or value of creative economy, transport statistics, number of visitors, and some indicator related to MSME and minerals. Next slide, please. On strategy goal number 4, an adaptable and proactive community, the statistical indicators are on trade and FDI by partner, and then on trade in value added, as well as indicator related to global value chain. On strategy goal number 5, a nimble and resilient community, we have indicators on renewable energy, food security, inflation, external debt, current account balance, and labor productivity. And for the last strategic goal, an inclusive, participatory, and collaborative community, the statistical indicators in the key OIs are GDP per capita, Gini ratio, indicators related to FDI, and services contribution to GDP. Next slide, please. Actually, during the drafting of the list of key outcomes indicators, we had discussion also during our first SCPC meeting this year. And then during that meeting, SCPC agreed that for the key outcome indicators that currently are not collected by SCSS, it is not necessary for the relevant is to follow the procedure in SSS protocol for new data requests, as those indicators are considered as priority of the AEC. And then SCPC also agreed that it is important to consider long-term plan for indicators currently not available in our database. Moving forward, SCPC suggested that statistical indicators for the KOIs to be managed under relevant working groups. So to follow up those suggestions and recommendations, we bring these issues to all of our working group meetings this year, particularly for the working groups to take note on these needs and to inform them that if the indicators are included in the AEC KOI, then we don't need to follow SSS protocol for new data requests. And then secondly, we discussed in the working group also to identify currently available indicators or potential availability in the future or in the near future, and also to identify relevant current works in member states, and also to discuss possible follow-up actions. We have a variety of response from each working groups, but in general, we could say that working group needs further discussion on this off-topic. And I think all of us agree that we will bring this as working group attention. And for your information, SCPC members, last week we have a meeting of working group on SNA. And this working group is
We lost you.
which is some relevant indicators are included in the AEC KOIs. And during the discussion, WGSNA is in the view to propose to establish task forces task forces to work on outcome indicators relevant to satellite accounts. Yeah. Why they propose this? Because the focal points of WJSNA is, yes, they are dealing with national account in the country, but satellite accounts are handled by different person, yeah, in different maybe in different group or different unit, yeah. That's why they propose to establish a task force to work on this, to expedite or to be able to develop a more systematic plan, yeah, to for the availability of some emerging needs which need to be handled or to be provided through satellite accounts. And the working group also suggested Ashanstat or tasked Ashanstat to draft concept note related to this, to draft concept note to be further discussed with WG-SNA. However, since the decision to establish task force is on SSS committee, so we bring this proposal to our meeting today for your inputs and suggestion. Maybe not only for SNA, but if you have suggestion on other working groups to follow up these issues, of course, will be welcome. Yeah. So I think that's all my presentation, Mr. Chair and other colleagues. Again, your inputs and suggestion will be really valuable. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Anang and ASEAN Secretariat for the presentation on AEC's KPI or COIS. Maybe we can open our discussion with regard to the with regard to the inputs as well as the strategic goals as well, and then our list. We have 97 proposed KOI, right? 94. So this has been ironed out by ASEAN Secretariat, right?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So we bring to the working group relevant indicators. Yeah. So in the working group meeting, not all indicators we present, but only in those indicators relevant with the respective working groups.
Okay. So because some indicators are derived from OECD and then IMF, so you have international as well here. So maybe we spend like 5 minutes or 10 minutes to go through, and then I will open for around the tables discussion.
Mr. Chair, I see Singapore raised hand.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, just some clarification from ASEAN Secretariat. So of the 94 indicators that we have, the KOIs, do we have some idea of how many of these are actually statistical indicators and how many are more operational indicators? And of those that are statistical indicators, how many of them does ASEAN Secretariat currently have? And how many do we need to go back to the AMSs to get them to start submitting the data? Do we have that overall picture? If you could share that with us, please.
I'm sorry, Singapore. To respond that, we need sometimes. Maybe we will respond later. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. But for general views, Priya and other colleagues, yes, some indicators are currently available, and then for those indicators that are not available, actually we have information on the alternative sources, including information that come from the respective sectoral body itself, yeah. But during the discussion, we are also in the view that the ideal situation is if the indicators is provided by member state itself, yeah. So I think everybody are in the same view. However, until the indicators become available, then the sectoral body is also okay to use alternative sources, yeah. And actually, some indicators from ASEAN point of view, we didn't see any possibility to obtain the relevant data, yeah, even in the next 5 years, yeah. So in such case, if you see on the list, I think they are open from anecdotal information, yeah. But in that case, it will be the works of sectoral bodies itself, yeah. Maybe they will invite us for discussion, but in that case, it will be the work of that sectoral bodies, yeah. So in the current list, you can see the variety of data sources. We are well informed on that. In some cases, we help them to collect, even though not from ICSS. We help them to collect just for us to get better common understanding.
Thank you, ASEAN.
And sorry, Mr. Chair, would like to respond the question earlier. "62 indicators are statistical indicators, and then 38 from that 62 already available in our database. And then 24 is from other sources. And 3, it is already included on the list, but on the sources, we still need discussion, yeah, or deliberation from with sectoral bodies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, ASEAN Secretariat. Yes, Indonesia.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is like more of a questions rather than suggestions. Maybe I just want to ask, because I see from the status here, there are several indicators which is classified into will be collected and then will be produced by national stats. So is this indicators should be, you know, completed or submitted at the same time, or can we make like prioritize the indicators into tiers, maybe high, medium, or etc., based on our readiness? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Indonesia. Actually, once the indicator is included in this list, it is considered as priority, yeah, by AEC. That's why in our previous meeting we agree not to follow our protocol for data request, yeah. So this considered as the list, and during the discussion we also already provide information for the indicators that are currently not available, but many of them finally still on the list, yeah. So we provide some info also and some suggestion or offering, yeah. For example, on digital economy or related to blue economy, we already provide suggestion to relevant division in ASEAN Secretariat, and they will forward to the sectoral bodies until the real indicators are available, maybe we can provide some not preliminary, but some intermediate indicators. For example, instead of the size or the size of digital economy, maybe we can provide what is currently available. For example, the value of digital trade or ICT trade, the value of ocean-related goods trade instead of the size of blue economy. But what we can provide is the ones that we already have international standard to follow. If still nothing to follow, then we will further discuss with sectoral body and with our working groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASEAN Secretariat. So I think on this matter, can we go one round around the table to seek views and inputs? Can I go to Brunei?
Mr. Chair, sorry, particularly your inputs and views on the proposal for WGSNA to establish task force.
On the SESS response then, the slide. Okay, the last item, that is the WGSNA to specifically propose to establish task force to work on KOI relevant to satellite accounts, and ASEAN start to draft concept note. So I think the first thing that we should have is the concept note, then the task force, or task force first, then the concept note.
It should be on the concept note first.
Okay.
However, since, as I mentioned earlier, since the decision to establish task force is on SSS committee, then we need your inputs for us how to draft the concept note. If, for example, if SCPC do not agree to establish the task force, then we will draft the concept note for other alternative mechanism.
Okay, all right, fair. So we will highlight, or we will discuss on this matter. So can we go from Brunei? Does Brunei have any comments and views or inputs?
For Brunei Darussalam, I think actually I attended the WGSNA last week, so I kind of know the issues. For this one, because they are proposing to have a satellite account, since like tourism satellite accounts is part of the priority of the WGSNA, and then it's also in the key outcome indicators. Then I think it's really like it's we support for the WGSNA to have a task force and for the ASEAN to draft the concept note. So it will align with both the WGSNA plan and then with the KOIs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Brunei, for your inputs and your views. Can we go to Cambodia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cambodia observed that based on the listening from the discussion and its comment provided by the other member states, as well as through this propose establish the task force as well as the concept note. We would like to propose, if possible, it should ASEAN Secretariat through the ASEAN START. As you already mentioned, there are a lot of indicators that already representative under the various goal and objective. So we think that it could be possible to develop a matrix for the mapping along the existing ASEAN ACCT as well as the other various working group responsible, so that we can clarify that where this indicator under the overlapping the existing ACSS goal as well as the reference working group, so that we think that it would be also the opportunity at the member state to promote and enhance our data availability at the national level as well. Since currently Cambodia developed a mechanism for the improvement of the tourism satellite account and also the other satellite account for improve our national satellite system. So if possible, I would recommend ASEAN START could do a matrix and highlight those indicators reflecting with the existing of the indicator where exists under the ASEAN Secretariat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Cambodia. So can I have any other views or additional views from Indonesia?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think regarding the establishment of task force for satellite accounts, we can concur on that because maybe the situations in Indonesia also, as explained by Pak Anang before. So we can agree on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indonesia. Can we proceed to Lao PDR for views and comments?
Yes, for Lao PDR, we have planned to conduct that satellite account. So now we already set up that task force in other countries. We collected data. We have the data to 2025, and the compilation will be in the 2026, and maybe we can publish on the 2027. That's about that concept note. So we further to discuss among the member of the working group in our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lau, for your inputs and comments. So can I have Malaysia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Malaysia, actually we already compiled satellite account, for example, tourism satellite account, ICT satellite account, sport satellite account, and so on. For task force establish task force, maybe some AMS don't have unavailable for satellite accounts, so we accept the proposal to establish the task force. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Malaysia. So can I have Myanmar's view on this matter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In Myanmar, WGSNA focal point is other department. According to our statistical system, it is decentralized. I will discuss to WGSNA for the task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Myanmar. So can I have the Philippines for comments and views?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the case of the Philippines, we are currently compiling satellite accounts on various areas of interest, such as tourism, on the digital, the blue, and the creative economies. Although for some of these have basically just started, it would be useful to create and to participate in these task forces so that there can be an exchange of ideas between the AMS to further improve the estimates that are currently being generated. And for the AMS who have not yet or who intend to start with the respective satellite accounts, I believe the task forces would be instrumental, will be helpful in helping our colleagues to pursue the development of the respective accounts. But I would also like to point out that it's also important that the ASEAN stats to still draft the concept note because aside from task forces, there might also be other steps, other activities which need to be undertaken for the ACSS to better respond to the needs of the AEC. Back to you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, the Philippines. Can I have Singapore's view, additional comments?
Chairman, just a clarification that perhaps ASEAN Stats can help with this. What is the terms of reference of the task force? Is it purely to look at satellite accounts, or is it something that is broader, looking at the KOIs, which we are currently not able to provide to the AEC? If it is just the satellite account, was there any discussion in WGSNA on the focus of which satellite account that they will want to establish a task force on? Maybe ASEAN Secretary can help to clarify.
Yes, thank you, Singapore. Of course, the discussion is based on the list of KOIs, but then WGSNA is in the view that from those lists, many of them can be produced through satellite or extended accounts. Yeah, that's why the sentences in my slide is like this. Yeah. However, I don't know, maybe during the discussion, it can be extended, I mean the coverage, but what I can inform you from the discussion in WGSNA is related to satellite accounts or extended accounts that can support the production of the indicators. Yeah.
Thank you, Pavana. So I suppose, given that we could raise this up to ACSS committee's consideration, considering that the suggestion coming from WGSNA and SCTC merit in having further discussion in this area of satellite accounts. And we do have some of the AMSs who are more experienced in compiling essays. Even in the case of Singapore, we are just starting to compile satellite accounts for digital economy, green economy. But we are also constrained by resources because compiling satellite account is a very resource-intensive approach. And even if we were to compile one set of accounts, we are not too sure whether we'll be able to do it on a sustainable basis. So clearly it is an area that we can learn from each other. So it might be useful to have a task force. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Singapore and ASEAN Secretariat. Can we seek comments and views from Thailand?
Thank you, Chairman. For the last bullet point on the WGSNA, I think Thailand concur with the WGSNA's proposal and also what the Pavana said that others that will draft the concept note, and I agree with Priya that there are so many satellite, I mean the success of the satellite account. For example, Thailand, we have the tourism satellite account, so we can share and we can prepare for the, I mean, for the indicator related to the to this topic. And I think I concur with the last topic the SNA proposed. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Thailand. So last but not least, can we hear from Vietnam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From Vietnam, we basically agree with the proposed to establish a task force. But we should clarify which satellite account should be focused on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vietnam. So for this paper, maybe we can conclude that the meetings agree to the setup of satellite account for the work of KOIs. However, the subject should be much more refined rather than being very general. And ASEAN Stats can start drafting the concept note. Maybe by seek to you can seek the ASEAN member states who has satellite account in their national level. Maybe we can share some of our knowledge as well as our views, so that this particular exercise can be expedited at the regional level. So can we say that ASEAN Stats?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair and all colleagues. We will further work with WJSNA on this matter. And of course, the concept not to be endorsed in the upcoming SSS committee meeting, because we need sometimes, of course, not only to drafting, but to further discuss with WJSNA. So maybe for the upcoming SSS committee meeting, we will just present this update. But on the finalization of concept note itself, we will discuss further with WJSNA and also with SCPC later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASEAN Stats. So can we proceed to the last item for today, that is agenda 8. Do we need a break for coffee, or can we proceed? So proceed. Anyone wants to have a coffee break? No? Yes? Okay, no. So we can proceed with item agenda 8, that is the API utilization for AMS data submission by ASEAN Secretariat. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For this opportunity, we are pleased to present the update on the utilization of API for ICCT data collection. Next slide. As shown in this slide, those are the points that will be shared in this presentation. I will start with a brief background and general information, followed by update on API implementation activities that are directly related to SCCT data collection. Next, I will cover other API initiatives that are not directly linked to the SCCT. Finally, I will outline the way forward and highlight the key message. Next slide. So I will provide a brief on the background. So the use of API is part of ASEAN-STAT and member state effort to modernize the ICCT data collection mechanism. The aim is to enhance accuracy, efficiency, and also support greater openness of ASEAN statistics. As of now, ASEAN-STAT are working closely with focal point from WGDSA of Indonesia and Singapore, and also with WGSITS of Singapore. Next slide. Regarding the utilization of API with Singapore for the data ICCT data collection, the process of mapping, retrieving, and transforming data into the ICCT format has been completed since early 2025. ASEAN-STAT has been providing API-based ICCT data to Singapore for verification. Several rounds of verification have already taken place. Currently, as of now, ASEAN-STAT is still addressing Singapore feedback. The latest round has taken longer due to our limited resource while managing parallel initiative. In addition, Singapore informed us on several endpoint adjustments that also need to be addressed. I think this is an important practice to ensure that accuracy and sustainability of API-based data. Next slide. For API implementation with BPS Statistik Indonesia, unfortunately, the status has not moved forward since it was last reported in February 2025. ASEAN-STAT acknowledged this delay and regret that significant progress has not yet been achieved. The next step will be to resume the technical discussion in October this year with a focus on mapping BPS API endpoint with ICCT indicator. Next slide. In parallel, I think previous okay. I think one slide missing here. In parallel, ASEAN-STAT has also conducted API exploration with WGSITS Singapore. The mapping provided by the focal point has been successfully completed, and ASEAN-STAT managed to retrieve API data from Singapore website for the aggregated total indicator. This progress was achieved relatively quickly because the WGSITS endpoint have a similar pattern to the WGDSA Singapore API. So, as I mentioned, those are the activity that directly related to the implementation of API to collect data from to collect the ICCT data. To ensure clarity on the next steps, ASEAN-STAT will complete this initiative in sequence, starting with WGDSA Singapore, followed by WGDSA Indonesia, and finally WGSITS Singapore. This order reflects the current level of progress and readiness in its initiative. Next slide. If previously I mentioned the activity that directly related to the SCCT. I will also share other initiative that related to the API, but not directly related to the SCCT data collection. So beyond those three activities, ASEANSat also follow up on the ACSS 14 recommendation to organize a sharing session on API by Singapore and Indonesia. Accordingly, at WGDSA 23 meeting in June this year, both countries share their experience in implementing public APIs, highlighting how their API development evolves over time. On this opportunity, Singapore and other AMS request or suggest ASEANSat to share technical aspect of API utilization step by step, so member state can understand what need to be prepared on their side. Second, member state also suggest ASEANSat to open API for public use as part of open data. Next slide. Way forward, ASEANSat will prepare the presentation to WGDSA on the API utilization process. And also it will be presented in the next WGDSA meeting next year. And regarding the open the API in the ASEANSat website, ASEANSat will planning accordingly. We understand that it is ensure or enhance the visibility of the data ASEAN statistic, but we have to ensure the integration with current dissemination system. It means how the ASEANSat organize the dissemination of indicator, and also consider infrastructure readiness and consider the cybersecurity safeguard. Next slide. So the key message, ASEANSat with Singapore and Indonesia is progressing in the development of API for data collection. Verification, mapping, and retrieval steps are essential to ensure data accuracy. API opens opportunity for modernization, transparency, and wider accessibility of ASEAN statistics. Next slide. I think that's all, the update on the implementation of API. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Sueka, ASEAN Secretariat. So can we have some discussion on this API utilization in our regular data collection from the NSO or ASEAN member states? So can we have our views from Vietnam?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Vietnam, we have no further comment on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vietnam. Can we have to seek clarification or even comments from Thailand?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also thank you, Indonesia and Singapore, to starting using an API in the two working group. So Thailand also support this API initiative from ASEAN staff and recommends strengthening technical sharing, resource planning, and infrastructure readiness to ensure sustainable and inclusive data modernization. And Thailand also, I think we are talking among working group and also among NSO colleagues to use the API also in some working group. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it very much, Thailand. So can I have Singapore for additional comments and views?
Chairman, no further comments and views, except we will continue to support ASEAN Secretariat to continue with this implementation priority that they have identified.
Thank you very much, Singapore. Can I have the Philippines?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This initiative is commendable, and hopefully in the future, all AMS will be using API for the ASICT. In the case of the Philippines, we will be referring this to our WGDSA focals in order to better assess the readiness of the Philippines on this. Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, the Philippines. Can we have comments or views from Myanmar?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nowadays, Myanmar need technical and financial for using API, but we will follow other AMS supported by the colleague from the AMS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Myanmar, for sharing. So can I have views and comments from Malaysia? Sekali.
Pak Sueka, is it correct that the next AMS that will implement API is Malaysia after Indonesia? I would like to double confirm on that.
Currently, honestly, ASEAN-SAT still have, as listed in the presentation, still have 3 outstanding. I believe the first one, just a matter of verification, some police particularly in metadata. So technically, ASEAN-SAT still have major outstanding with WGDSA Indonesia and WGSITS Singapore. So once ASEAN-SAT complete that queue, ASEAN-SAT will invite WGDSA Malaysia.
Okay, thank you, Pak Sueka.
Okay, of that, Malaysia appreciate and commend ASEAN-SAT for advancing the API initiative to modernize SCICT data collection. This timely effort strengthen efficiency, accuracy, and openness in ASEAN statistics. Malaysia fully support ASEAN-SAT's proposed way forward, including phased technical sharing, exploring a public API for open data enhancement, and aligning with the SCCS data governance framework and the SCCS action plan. From Malaysia perspective, we are ready to participate in the pilot phase and future rollout. For conclusion, Malaysia reaffirmed its strong support for this initiative and ready for pilot testing to ensure successful and sustainable API implementation across ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malaysia. So can we have views and comment from Lau?
Thank you, Chair. For Lao PDR, so we appreciate with Singapore and Indonesia that you have a good initiative on this API, so we can learn from this later. But nowadays, in Laos, we also develop that web portal to share our data among the Life Ministry and on the official statistic producers in other countries. So we hope this will be useful for that for the data sharing in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lau, for sharing and your comments. So can we go to Indonesia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm very sorry to hear that the status is unchanged since February 2025. So what I can offer here is to ASEAN Stats, maybe you can engage SCPC for the coordination so that we can support you to have to have more progress on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Indonesia. So can we have views and comments or inquiries from Cambodia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, we would like to appreciate to the ASEAN Stat that already work very well with the Singapore for this process of the using the API for the modernization of the data availability and sharing more efficiently. In this regard, we would like to request each ASEAN Stat it could extend and piloting with Cambodia maybe in the early next year. Since we now already apply the SDMH API for the SDG indicator, and we also currently work closely with the Vital Strategy supported project at the country level using the API for data sharing between the Ministry of Health to our central data platform, and using the similar practices that we so far adopt the SDMH API. So if we could participate as the pilot phase for data sharing using the API, we will be confirm our participation and work closely with ASEAN Stat. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Cambodia, for the suggestion and comments. So last but not least, can we have Brunei's views and comment? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So for Brunei, we have no further comments, but we actually appreciate this initiative from ASEAN SAC, and we await for the findings or all the challenges that's being faced from the pilot lead projects, AMSs, because we want to have more expertise on this particular area. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brunei. So thank you again to all SCPC's members and ASEAN member states for actively participating in this for today's meeting. And maybe can I provide or give back to the ASEAN Secretariat if there's any other comments or any other updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to express appreciation and glad to hear the interest from the member state to work together with ASEANSat to implement the API for ASICT data collection. ASEANSat will inform the respective member state. However, will focus first with the current outstanding, especially current outstanding not in the member state side that why it is still outstanding, but more at the ASEANSat side, because currently we have several initiatives that involve the IT, especially virtual academy, enhancement of the ASEANSat website, and also that related to the big data. That's why ASEANSat cannot move forward significant. So again, thank you for the interest. ASEANSat will inform once we're ready to move forward to the next member state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASEAN Secretariat. So now we have concluded 8 of our agenda for today. So we have more agendas tomorrow, like 11 agendas, because we have like 19 agendas in total for 2 days. So I think on that remark, I'd like to extend our appreciation to ASEAN Secretariat, and again to the ASEAN member states who has actively participated in and provide a very insightful inputs as well as comments and valuable suggestions to us during our meeting that we can refine and make betterment to our ASEAN statistical systems. So I think I would like to stop there. So ASEAN Secretariat, the meeting, or I will pass back to ASEAN Secretariat. Thank you.
I think no further comments from our side, Mr. Chair. So again, thank you very much for today, Mr. Chair, and all colleagues. Thank you.
Okay, so we will meet again tomorrow at 8:30 Jakarta's time and 9:30 Malaysia time, or Putrajaya's time. So thank you very much, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have a good rest. Bye.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Berapa